Welcome to r/Entitled People, where we share stories from your lives about people who think the rules don't apply to them, and they should get what they want. Thank you, friends, for subscribing to the channel, and for so many likes. And today we have two great stories, so subscribe, hit the like button, and let's begin. The first story. The guy in charge of overseeing the security provider on behalf of the company was an arrogant a-hole. Was fired by the CEO. The second story. The police forbade the HOA to come on my property or they will go to jail. The first story. The best of his own world. I can't avoid a little background information. I'm a security expert. Upon request, I analyze the security risks of the client company. The work begins with a tour and evaluation of the site or sites, but also includes an analysis of policies and corporate procedures, and a number of interviews with persons concerned. In many cases, there is no specialized security manager, but one usually logistical middle manager is the designated manager in the field of security, and the company contracts with the security service provider to perform the work. This person, the designated manager, should check that the service provider has performed correctly. The other unavoidable background information is that in my country, Eastern Europe, is a practice that cannot be called never seen before in the private security industry. There is strong price competition between security providers, which often takes businesses to the limit of legal options or even beyond. One such trick they try to keep their prices down is to not pay taxes or contributions on wages in part or in full. This then accumulates, and when the management of the company already sees that the tax authority will soon be investigated, they file for bankruptcy and the company goes out without a legal successor. By the time things get this far, there's already another newly established company. Someone who gave his name to the foundation for some money as new owner. That company buys the assets of the bankrupt company, mostly at an auction organized by the tax authorities to reduce the irrecoverable claim. The contracts of the bankrupt company will be taken over by the new company on the basis of private agreements. Of course, the tax authority guys aren't stupid either, so they notice the warning signs soon enough. This kind of bankruptcy game is becoming more and more difficult. Professional organizations are also becoming more and more vigilant, but there are always those who prefer this gamble. Sorry for this lengthy preparation, but it is necessary for understanding. On the story now. I was hired by a medium-sized company. I found some minor risks. Nothing serious at first glance, but there was something weird. The guy who was in charge of overseeing the security provider on behalf of the company was an arrogant a-hole. Let's call him AH. It's not unusual. At companies, this occurs from self-appointed deities of this level. He wasn't helpful at all. In fact, at some point, he even allowed himself to say, "I'll dictate to you what to write, so I'm happy with it." By the way, I noticed that he spoke to everyone with a lower rank, as if they were his servants. No one liked him, not even the bosses, though he was maximally friendly and ready to serve toward them. Of course, these bosses weren't idiots either. They knew that the guy was not a character, but he brought the results expected of him, and they did not know anything about him that would have been seen as a problem with him. In the course of my research, it became apparent that as soon as I mentioned Mr. AH to the security staff, there was an immediate deathly silence as reaction. I scheduled the next interview with the security service boss. Usually such an interview is 30-40 minutes. In problematic cases, of course, more. In this case, I had extra questions. I thought 50 minutes was a pretty good estimate. I was very wrong. Only the first few seconds of this interview were as usual. Introduction, shaking hands, and sitting at the table. Afterwards, however, the guy from the security company took an envelope from his pocket with the same momentum as he sat down, and pushed it over to me with the following words. "Mr. AH didn't say how much I have to give, but it's really the maximum I can take out of the company right now." I knew there was a dead dog in one of the bushes, but I didn't expect that. It took me a while to sort out hacking my temper, so I opened the envelope and took the money out of it. I laid it out on the table neatly, just like the banknotes arranged as evidence when I was a criminal detective. The amount was roughly 3,000 euros. I looked into the guy's eyes over the unfolded money. By this time, he was dead pale. I see a long and interesting conversation waiting for us now. Well, the story of him and their company was as follows. The previous owner began to prepare for the bankruptcy quite slowly and carefully, which of course he did not tell the staff about. He also forgot to mention the accumulating tax and contribution debt. Employees have only heard that the owner is constantly complaining about decreasing revenues, and constantly mentions that he would prefer to leave the business. The staff still had the well-functioning business in front of their eyes. They discussed it with each other and found it to be a great opportunity of their lives. Then the staff selected the new boss from their rank, and an offer was made to the owner for the company. The members of the staff took all their savings on the table, pumped up with credits. For the original owner, this was even better than the planned bankruptcy. Thus, the tax authority retained the new owner cooperative, and he was able to dance to his new company whistling cheerfully. At the time of the sale, it was contracted that the new owners would take over the company, as it stands at the time of signing. By the time of signing, however, the owner had already selected the company's original contracts, and which he wanted to transfer. They were already under termination at the time of signing. The company's staff stayed there with a few shops, a few smaller overnight jobs, and Mr. AH's company. It was their biggest contract. They had to stick very much to it. The tax authorities, as I said, are not stupid. They immediately understood what had happened, but the debt is dead. They could not let it go. All legally available relief, repayment installations, penalty interest remission were awarded, but the company, between the depleted contract stock and debt, struggled to survive. It was already quite a drama, as these people put their full savings into this company. But the thing could still be worse. The partners were notified of the change of ownership, and Mr. AH felt the blood in the water. From the moment he assessed the importance of their contract, he demanded small services from the security company. Being a determined party animal, he required that at least 2 volunteer bodyguards accompany him on his lazy nights. His car was also driven by the bodyguards at this time, as he became stiff drunk. Of course, he also harassed women at this time, which is why his bodyguards regularly got into fights. Major repairs to his car, garden work in his house were also required. The security company, of course, tried to conclude new contracts, but no matter how good their offers were, for some reason they never got contracts that could liberate them from Mr. AH's tyranny. By this time, the guy from the security company had already realized I didn't want to hang his skin in the sun. When he was about to finish, I stacked things in my head for a while, then asked him for the followings. Statements from all volunteer bodyguards. How many times, under what circumstances was Mr. AH escorted? What incidents occurred? How much would such a service have cost if you had paid for it? List and pricing of all free car service and gardening services. List of all clubs to which Mr. AH has been escorted. A list of all the companies, where they submitted applications and not one. He was surprised at this last one, but by the time he described it, he had already realized what my suspicions were. Thus, the 50-minute interview became a testimony of 2 hours and a 5 minutes video recorded. I finished collecting data at the company, but before I retired to my office to prepare my report, I knocked on the CEO's door. I briefly informed him that he could wait for my report in about 10 days, and then the next conversation took place between us. Do you want me to give a presentation when I submit my report? Sometimes it's definitely helpful to inform the decision makers of the company this way. The CEO definitely looked back at me curiously. He felt it was much more of a suggestion than a question. Do you think such a presentation would be useful for our company? In my opinion, it would be informative and useful, but the decision is yours. If you choose to do so, please send me an email. For a few moments, I could almost see the gears spinning rapidly behind his forehead. He looked at me well once again, then said, "Of course, the security service is the responsibility of Mr. AH. I guess you have no objection to also have him present at the presentation?" "Oh no," I replied. "In fact, I insist on his presence." By the time I got back to my office, the CEO's email was already waiting. In an objective but firm letter, he asked me to give a presentation on the content of my report. It was also addressed to the 4 directors and Mr. AH. It really took me 10 days to prepare my report, primarily because I went through the clubs where Mr. AH went. I talked to baristas, doormen, and owners. After that, I phoned and corresponded with the companies whose contracts were not won by the security service provider. Mr. AH's neighborhood also proved interesting. It really took me 10 days to prepare my report. The clubs confirmed point by point what could be gathered from the statements of the volunteer bodyguards. Mr. AH was well known as a troublemaker, but was not banned because he was thought to be something of a mobster, because of the constant of 2 or more bodyguards, or someone influential. They didn't want to do more trouble with the ban than they would have solved. Mr. AH's neighborhood also proved interesting. Neighbors confirmed that AH's garden was cared for by several gardeners who were treated like dogs. These gardeners came in a security company car. It was also confirmed that AH regularly went into the night with 2 or more gorillas and brought them home at dawn. To all that, I added the pricing sent by the boss of the security company. He wrote down nicely which service costs how much per hour and how many hours Mr. AH took them from, for free. It was a good chunky sum of money. But that was still the less distasteful part of the whole picture. I did not find it plausible at the outset that a professionally well-established security company with attractive prices would not be able to conclude new contracts. In fact, I wasn't really surprised that the companies I contacted all indicated that they hadn't opted for the company because of the unfavorable opinions. The source of the unfavorable opinions was none other than the reference person, Mr. AH. He did not hesitate to do anything to keep his victims in a vulnerable situation. By doing all this, he also committed more than 1 felonies. And it was time for a presentation. I don't know what the CEO talked to the directors about or what he didn't. but the air vibrated with tension. Mr. AH alone was completely relaxed. He definitely enjoyed being able to be with the big bosses of the company. I started my presentation by stating that in my investigation, I uncovered a few minor problems and a really significant one. I gave a rather hasty up to 5-minute overview of the minor issues. Then I turned to the big pile of... This was the time when barking clouds began to gather on Mr. AH's serene face. Originally, I expected to see some anxiety, fear, and possibly remorse on him as I progressed, but I didn't. Mr. AH was outraged. When I set out to explain how he prevented the security company from entering into new contracts, Mr. AH exploded. "How dare you investigate me? My privacy has nothing to do with the company. I'm going to sue you and don't even expect to get a penny for this junk, what you call a report, and I'll fire this SH security company right away. Such an ungrateful gang. They would bite into the hand that feeds them." "Please, AH, shut up," said the CEO. "The directors and I are interested in the expert's findings. If he's done, we might give you a chance to talk." I continued. I described the security company boss's calculations of how much service Mr. AH squeezed out of them. I listed how many and what felonies he committed. I hinted at the impact this could have on the company. I reported on the statements, the testimonies. Death silence followed my presentation. A few very long seconds later, the CEO took out his phone and sent a message to someone. Maybe 2 minutes later, one of the security guards showed up. The CEO did not even speak to Mr. AH, but to the security guard. "Accompany AH to his office. He can't take anything with him except his coat and bag. Also check his bag. He can't take company documents on his corporate laptop. Then escort him out of the building. From today, Mr. AH can only move in the building with an escort." The face the security guard showed was brilliant satisfaction. Later, at the request of the CEO, I was involved in a negotiation with the security company. Their company feared, and somewhat rightly, that there could be a lawsuit for damages in the case. Therefore, a compensation acceptable to both parties was agreed, although in fact the security service providers were already happy to get rid of AH. And the last story is, all I asked was proof of insurance before allowing work to be done on my property. So I'm in a long-running dispute with my HOA because they refused to follow the CC&Rs and bylaws. Anyway, they decided to take down some trees on HOA property behind the houses on our street and wanted access to the trees by coming across my property, and I refused until I had proof of insurance from the contractor. The HOA said that the contractor gave them a certificate of insurance, COI, and they provided one from the HOA to me. Problem is that the tree removal company provided a COI that stated information only in the certificate holder box, which means that maybe they have insurance, but if something happens on someone's property that they're not liable. Neat little trick, and the HOA idiots fell for it. I still refused work until I have a valid COI naming me as the certificate holder from the tree company. So the HOA president comes onto my driveway and starts to argue with me, and I told him to leave my property. He refused, stating that he has a right to be on my property anytime he wants to. Told him to leave again, that he's trespassing, and he again refuses and says I should call the state police. He finally leaves and I call the SP. They went to see him and let him know that CC&Rs and bylaws do not supersede state and federal protections for private property protection. Told the SOB that if I call them again, he will be arrested and taken to jail. I hope you enjoyed these stories. Hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Have a good day.